Have you ever wondered which countries rank highest in corruption? Corruption, a deeply rooted problem, can be attributed to numerous factors. Poor governance, a lack of transparency, and weak institutions often sow the seeds of corruption, allowing it to infiltrate every level of society. It's a complex issue, one that can drastically impact a nation's prosperity and the well-being of its citizens. So prepare yourself, as we're about to dive into the depths of the world's most corrupt countries, starting from number 10. At number 10, we have a country where corruption is a significant challenge. It's a place where public funds frequently disappear into the pockets of officials, where bribes are a common part of daily life, and where transparency in government is more of a dream than a reality. According to Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index, this country scored less than 30 out of 100, indicating a severe corruption problem. Despite efforts to combat corruption, this country remains in the top 10. Moving on to number 9, this country sadly has corruption deeply woven into its societal fabric. From the highest echelons of power to the smallest local offices, bribes and kickbacks are commonplace. The public sector especially is riddled with corruption, impeding the delivery of essential services. This pervasive corruption has stifled economic development, widened social inequality, and undermined trust in institutions. Despite numerous anti-corruption campaigns and policy reforms, the situation remains grim. The fight against corruption here continues. At number 8, we find a nation grappling with deep-rooted corruption issues. From petty bribery to high-level embezzlement, the corruption here is a complex web. For instance, the oil for food scandal involved top officials exploiting humanitarian efforts for personal gain. Moreover, recent Transparency International reports indicate that over 3/4 of the population consider corruption a major problem. Despite efforts to combat this pervasive issue, corruption remains deeply ingrained in the social fabric. The struggle against corruption here is ongoing. Coming in at number 7, a nation where corruption has woven itself into the very fabric of daily life. From bribery and embezzlement to nepotism and fraud, this nation's corruption issues are multifaceted and deeply entrenched. It's a place where the rule of law often takes a backseat to the rule of the highest bidder. Despite numerous initiatives, legislative reforms, and international pressure, the fight against corruption has been an uphill battle. Despite attempts to address corruption, this country remains on the list. Now, at number 6, corruption has woven itself into the very fabric of this nation's administration. From the highest echelons of power to the humblest public servant, the stench of corruption is ubiquitous. It's a grim reality that has entrenched poverty, stifled innovation, and eroded public trust. The government's commitment to rooting out corruption is more rhetoric than reality. As we continue to witness a brazen flaunting of power and misuse of public funds, it's clear that the fight against corruption in this country is far from over. Halfway through our list at number 5, we have a country where corruption is, unfortunately, more of a norm than an exception. The government, law enforcement, and even the educational system are riddled with corruption. From petty bribery to high-level embezzlement, it's a country where integrity seems to have lost its way. Despite numerous anti-corruption campaigns, the problem persists, deeply rooted in the society's fabric. This country continues to grapple with significant corruption. Moving into the top 4, we find a nation burdened by deep-seated corruption. Here, graft and bribery are sadly commonplace, with public officials often misusing their power for personal gain. Transparency and accountability are, unfortunately, more of an ideal than a reality. This country's citizens face the brunt of these issues, enduring poor public services and a lack of faith in their government. Despite numerous attempts at reform, corruption remains deeply ingrained. The battle against corruption here is still being fought. On the podium at number 3, we find a country that is embroiled in a deep-seated culture of corruption. This nation grapples with an insidious mix of bribery, embezzlement, and fraud, which infiltrates all sectors of society. From petty corruption in local government to grand corruption at the state level, the integrity of institutions is undermined, hindering its development. Despite international scrutiny and internal reform efforts, the corruption index remains alarmingly high. This country continues to struggle with corruption at many levels. Just missing the top spot, at number 2, we have a nation gripped by a deep-rooted culture of corruption. From the highest levels of government to the everyday citizen, bribery, embezzlement, and nepotism are entrenched practices, staining the fabric of its society. The devastating impact is felt in every sector, from education to healthcare, undermining progress and development. Despite extensive international aid and numerous reform initiatives, the scourge of corruption persists. Despite efforts to combat corruption, this country remains near the top of our list. And finally, the most corrupt country in the world is plagued by a pervasive culture of bribery, embezzlement, and nepotism. This country's corruption is deeply rooted, affecting every layer of society. Its political landscape is marred by scandals, while the public sector is riddled with graft. Even the judiciary, which should be the bastion of justice, is not immune. From top to bottom, corruption is the norm rather than the exception. This country tops our list as the most corrupt in the world. There you have it, the 10 most corrupt countries in the world. From the 10th to the 1st, each country we've discussed is grappling with corruption issues that run deep within their governmental and societal structures. These problems range from bribery and embezzlement to nepotism and cronyism, all of which are detrimental to the development and progress of these nations. It's important to remember that corruption isn't just about money. It's about power, control, and the erosion of trust. It creates an environment of inequality and injustice, where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. It hampers economic growth, discourages foreign investment, and undermines the rule of law. Every citizen, every leader, every nation has a role to play in combating corruption. It's about standing up for justice, promoting transparency, and demanding accountability. It's about creating a world where everyone has a fair shot at success. Corruption is a global issue that requires global solutions. It's time to take a stand against corruption.